Okay. So, Shabbat Shalom, everyone. It is really great to feel that I'm speaking at one of my homes and surrounded by friends, family, and so many people that are part of my life and part of my box of life. So, in the spirit of Shabbat, and when I was thinking about tonight, and knowing that I'm going to be speaking about legacy, and I was thinking, wow, Pesach is just around the corner. And then I suddenly realized that we are experts in retelling the story. We tell our story over and over again. In Purim, every Purim, we read the Megillah. Then Pesach, every Pesach, we read the same Haggadah. And although we read different Parashat HaShavua every week, every year, we read over and over the Torah. So I was thinking, and there is a question I want to share with all of you. What happens if we stop reading the Haggadah? What happens if we don't read the Megillah anymore? What happens if we don't read the Torah over and over again? And why do we care about those stories so much? Any insights? And I will be asking a lot of questions, so yes, please. Beautiful. Any other insights? Yes. That's a good question and reflection. And I will tell you more about that. Yes. Beautiful. Yes. And as we heard, when we forget or we don't remember our stories, that can lead us to forgetting our identity, our roots, who we are, where we came from, where we're going to. So, and every time we look at the story again and again, we are looking into our identity. And every time, incredibly enough, we learn something new. Every time we read the parasha, there is something that we uncover. Every time we read the Haggadah, there is a new conversation around the table. And our ancestor stories are our legacy as well. We are together in that same story. Actually, we say, Avadim Ainu b'Mitzrayim. We don't say, we say, we were slaves in Egypt. We don't say, Emayu Avadim. They were the slaves. It is us. So if we are so good retelling the stories, our communal stories, and we know the value it carries, why many times we are not preserving our own stories? And it's the stories that matter the most beyond the material things. That's our legacy. With that in mind, I want to share the story that inspired me to write the Box of Life. And it all started in the year 2000 in this Jewish community. I was at the Jewish community without walls, and I had this passion to welcome newcomers. I've been a newcomer myself. Most of us have been a newcomer to a community. And one day, there is this man who comes to the Jewish Federation because he knew that's the first place you need to go when you move into a community. And he said, Hineni, here I am. I want to meet people. I want to get involved. He moved here with his sweet wife, Mildred, from San Antonio to be closer to his only child, Aina, who we are very lucky to have with us here tonight, and you will hear from her as well. And I opened the door, I saw him, and regardless of our 50 years difference, we clicked immediately. We became very, very good friends. And he was a very interesting, creative, opinionated, stubborn man. And he got involved in every committee that you can think of. And then one day, when I stepped down from the Jewish Federation, and after having him come to my office almost every day to tell me how things need to be done, and I stepped down, and he calls me, and he says, Orit, I want the world to know who Charles Stern is, and I want you to write my memoir. I looked at him, and I said, Charles, can you hear my accent, my English? You're asking me, and I'm not a writer? And he said, you get me. And I did what you would do for a friend. I said, you know what? I will meet with you every other week. You will share your stories, and we will see where that will take us. So I started doing that, going every other week. And after 2 months, more or less, one day, he gives me a box, a very old, heavy box. Office Depot was on the, and he says, Orit, you have my life in your hands. How many times I've heard that before? So I said, what's that? And he said, go home, open the box, and you will see. Okay, it was raining outside. I was holding a man's life in my hands. I get home, I open the box, and that moment shook me. I'm not sure if any of you ever saw an X-ray of a soul. I didn't know that's even possible. But that day, I found Charles Stern X-ray of his soul. I opened the box, and I felt like an archaeologist trying to put pieces together to see the larger picture. There were many, many papers, including love poems that his wife wrote to him over 50 years for Valentine's Day. In that yellow old paper that is very special, handwritten, there were articles that he wrote, articles about him, letters complaining in every single Jewish organization that you know in our community about, letters letting him go, his favorite quotes, his favorite stories. And I believe there are a few of you here that might have met Charles Stern before, but I remember. So, you know, he was very, very opinionated and very, very wise. So I opened that box, and for the first time, I called him and I said, Charles, we actually have a book. First, I thought about the man in the box. And later on, I realized, okay, I was asking myself how many questions I haven't answered about my ancestors and what I would be putting in a box if it was my life. And I realized that it's not only Charles Stern's story or box, but it is our story, our boxes. And I've started coaching people in putting their boxes together. I've started having many conversations with others who wanted to create the X-ray of their soul. It took me a few years, and here I am, not only letting you know who Charles Stern was, but also motivating, inspiring you to think about your own legacies. After all, we die twice. First, when we stop breathing, and the second time, when we are forgotten. According to someone much younger than me, told me that there is a third time when we lose our social media accounts too. And I started thinking about all of that, and I can tell you that Charles Stern gave me the best gift I ever got from anyone, the gift that we need to share with the people we love. He completely kicked me out of my comfort zone. He made me write this book in English about his life and get published. So I want to tell you that Charles Stern lived with purpose. And you will read about him in the book. And then I realized that our best legacy is about our own purpose in our life. The way we are living, that's our legacy. That's what we see in the Haggadah. We capture the purpose and the meaning, and that's how we are retelling the story. Today, we are all for a treat because we will do something that I have not done before. And we have here very special people that I need to thank who shared their stories in this book. There are many Bethel members who heard that I'm writing the book and they start sharing what's in their box. So as I told you, we're lucky to have Aina here, and she gave me the blessing to share her dad's story with everyone, with the world. And she will read the foreword to the book. We have Michelle Paz here. Michelle, you called me to solicit me or thank me for our gift to Bethel. And you asked me, tell me what you're doing these days. And I shared with you that I'm writing a book. And immediately, you started sharing me a really beautiful story about your mom that I would not have known if it wasn't for that call. And it was very special that you shared that story in the book. And then Steve Goldberg, also a Bethel member, who was my kid's high school history teacher many, many years before even I thought of writing a book. And he had a very special story about a friendship that is in the book that he will share. The book is structured in many different chapters that are different themes we all have somehow in our legacy. From romantic love, and today we have a 60th anniversary here, celebration. So it's stories about how different couples met, which is one of my favorites. We have a chapter on the taste and aromas of our soul. Think about all those foods growing up that bring so much nostalgia. We have a chapter on different objects that have a story. If you walk around your house, you can listen to those stories of things that are important. Some of them, we don't know why, but we know that they were in our family for a long time. There is a chapter about family. There is a chapter about friendship. There are also 5 guiding questions that I want you to start thinking about. Those are questions that I found answered in Charles' box. One question is, who am I? It sounds like a very simple question, but it's not. The other one is, how am I living my life? I also found what's most important to me, which speaks about the values. If I ask any one of you about your life, you're not going to share with me the day you were born until today. You will curate what's most important to you. And that's what I found in Charles' box. It was one box. There are many others that Aina had in her, somewhere in your house, right? But he gave me one with one story. The other question is, how do I want to be remembered? And what do I want to pass to generations to come? What's my Haggadah? So I will invite our readers, one by one, to share their story. We will engage in some questions, and then at the end, we will have a conversation where you can ask questions to me and to our readers as well. Aina, I will invite you to come. Yeah. I would like to invite you to find your own story within the stories, the same way we know how to do that when we read every parasha. Yes, the one.
Shabbat Shalom. Before I read, I just want to say that my dad is so proud of his legacy being told and celebrated in this way. And I am too. So thank you. The world was at a standstill, and so was I. Recently retired and rendered housebound by the pandemic, I decided it was time to reckon with things that I had put on the back burner while working and traveling and taking care of all those other things that required an immediate response. So in June of 2020, I undertook the cumbersome chore I'd avoided for 8 years. 15 file boxes filled with documents, articles, lectures, reports, cards, letters, taxes, medical records, removed from my late parents' desks and file cabinets, were still sitting in storage, taking up precious space. Being an only child, I already had the letters that were meant for me, and the keepsakes, the art, the dishes, the photos, the furniture, and the important legal documents and records. But what would I do with the ephemera of my parents' lives? What would I do with my own? Although they had pared down their belongings as they grew older, I do believe my parents kept every paper that touched their hands, particularly my mom. My dad was adept at filing, and his files were voluminous. Mom's had labels only she understood, and were overstuffed with whatever she wanted to put away at that moment in time. This was a mutual source of irritation as they occasionally worked on projects together. So my home became the repository for my parents' archives, and I became the reluctant archivist and shredder. The path down this paper trail was overwhelming, both emotionally and physically. What if I missed something important, something sentimental, something valuable even? I had endured the grieving process long ago, but what if it started all over again? My relationship with my parents was a powerful one, often challenging, always loving. For the last 10 years of their lives, we lived in the same town again, and they died just 4 months apart, after a marriage spanning almost 65 years. I knew there was a lot of life in those boxes, and I spent a long time going through them. But I didn't cry until I was nearing the end of the task. and I received an unexpected email. It was from a close friend of my dad, who said, "I finally completed the project I promised your dad before he left us." I had forgotten that he had given his friend a box too. It was quite different from the ones I inherited. It was curated. Her box contained only items he mindfully and tenderly placed there to tell the story of Charles M. Stern. All my sorting and my shredding and my recycling was a duty discharged. And by the end, I saved the equivalent of one box of papers. Orit's work was truly a labor of love and perseverance. And ultimately, she had written a book that fulfilled more than a promise. I received the completed manuscript the next day, and I wept with happiness. The Box of Life project was inspired by my dad, but it is much more than the story of a life. It's about the families, friendships, and communities that shape us. It offers a practical, original way to collect what you wish to pass down to your own loved ones, and a means of parting with those things that you can, and probably should, discard along the way. I am thrilled to see his wisdom and humor reflected in these pages. And I am so grateful to Orit for the friendship they shared and for the sisterhood that she and I now share. And Charles, I'm certain, is delighted that his spirit lives on.
And I need to confess that when I called her to see if she's okay with me writing this book and the manuscript, I was in fear, shaking. I said, what she will think? Here I'm writing a story about her dad. And that's the other gift that Charles gave me, not only kicking me out of my comfort zone, but giving me Aina in my life. I think he knew what he was doing. Yeah. So we all have those papers that we don't know what to do with them. For some reason, we start collecting things that belong to our kids, to ourselves, and they're all over the place. I'm now a big advocate about starting one place, and I see a baby coming there. So start the book of life as soon as your baby is born, because then we get overwhelmed with all the things that we collect. I want to invite Michelle to share her mom's story. It is a story that inspires us to preserve really what matters most and pass it down to our families.
Sorry, I'm emotional because I know my mother also would. And I hope I can get through this story. But being a teacher that I am, I also brought some that people can look at afterwards if they want. There's some of the books that my mother wrote, beautiful, magnificent books that were bound, that she made many copies of for me, for my brother, for my kids, that we can pass down. Okay, thanks. We called our time capsule a look back in time kind of thing. So I'll just read the one section. Time capsule or box of life. There are many different creative ways to box. I love the story of someone who, just like Charles, and by the way, I remember your dad very well. I used to volunteer at JFS with seniors, and he was a character. A good character, a wonderful character. I love the story of someone who, just like Charles, had never heard of a box of life, but in some ways created her own. Phyllis, my mother, was born in Melbourne, Australia on July the 5th, 1919, and spent her life in South Africa. Her daughter, me, described her as a woman ahead of her times, a wife, a mother, a physician, a photographer, an intrepid traveler who visited far-flung places on her own before most people had heard of these places. She was a quiet intellectual who was an avid reader, a writer, a family historian, a collector, and a forward-thinking dreamer. With that spirit, Phyllis put together a time capsule for her children and grandchildren. She gave her children a box with the following instructions: not to be opened till 10 years after my death. She brought the time capsule to the United States from South Africa on one of her visits in the early 90s. It was stored in my house in the attic until she passed away in 2000. And then we still had to wait 10 years after that. And was eventually opened in Washington, D.C. with her then adult children 10 years later. And I shared, we were so excited, especially me, as I wanted to break the rule and open the box after my mom died. But my kids were horrified and said, "No, Granny wanted us to wait." We joked about all the kinds of things that would have been in the box, including gold coins and diamonds coming from South Africa. But no such luck. But what we found was priceless. My mom included some very interesting newspapers from the 50s, some South African political articles, as well as personal items of my father's and hers. We were mostly in awe that she had done this and loved the window into which she thought about. It spurred me on to do a similar thing for my kids and grandkids, and I've started collecting things already, more modern technology that maybe like cell phones, the original cell phone, things like that that my kids and grandkids would never be able to relate to. Phyllis intended her capsule to reveal something about when she was no longer around, just as Charles hoped in his box would empower me to let the world know who he was. Phyllis's box included what matters most to her during her different stages of her life. Therefore, it was a dynamic time capsule. The story is another one that reminds us of how universal the impulse to box is. The fact that she curated her life in one box and yet accomplished her goal of sharing what mattered most is a good example of how less can be more. And it's true. It was one box that she schlepped from South Africa to Durham, that then went to DC, and then we opened it, I guess in 2010. And it was amazing. And well,
Thank you so much, Michelle. So every time I think about those stories, I get emotional too. We learn about what others are carrying with them that I would not have known. That's why we all need to solicit for the Jewish community, right? It was very, very special to learn about your mom. And I want all of you to start thinking, what time capsule would you like to have from one of your ancestors? I would love to have my great-grandparents' time capsule and ask them so many questions. But now I'm thinking, if I don't create my own time capsule or box of life, I'm doing the same thing from my grandchildren and great-grandchildren. They will not know about me. There is another chapter in the book about friendship, and specifically about intergenerational friendship. I believe most of us have one And if not, I highly recommend that. It's a wisdom relationship in many ways. And I want to invite Steve to share his story with Abe.
Shabbat Shalom. I'm going to read what's in the book and supplement a little bit. So this is titled the Gift of Intergenerational Friendships. And apologies, I had the flu a while ago, and I have what I've determined is post-viral cough. I'm not contagious at all. It may sound bad. I feel fine, but if I start coughing, that's why, and it's okay. You may have heard of the generation gap, in which people of different generations don't understand each other or share the same interests. Intergenerational friendships can bridge that gap. They are a great way to learn new things and gain new perspectives. You get to see how another generation, older or younger, thinks about various issues, and you can learn about concerns you might not have considered before. A beautiful intergenerational story that touched me deeply is one between Steve Goldberg, who is a veteran high school history teacher, Holocaust educator, and lawyer in his 40s, now more so, and Abe Piasek, an elderly Holocaust survivor. Steve wrote, "When I first met my friend Abe Piasek, he had just turned 90. He came to my school as a Holocaust survivor speaker. I knew nothing about him. So the weekend before I met him, I Googled Abe Piasek and ended up watching 5 to 6 hours of his speeches online. I'd found a part of Abe's digital box of life. He had a powerful story of survival as he was taken from his family in Poland at the age of 13. He toiled in 3 slave labor camps from 1942 to 1945. And when he was liberated in 1945 at age 16 and a half, he weighed 75 pounds. Once we met, he spoke at my school for only about 45 minutes because we didn't have time. We didn't have an auditorium. And so he actually spoke 4 times. He spoke to our 9th graders for 45 minutes, then our 10th graders for 45 minutes, then he was tired and went home to Raleigh. And then he came back the next week and spoke to our 11th and our 12th graders. And we kind of bonded over, this is not the way to do this. Right, the videos I watched online were him speaking for an hour and 40 minutes, 2 hours. He was really quite gifted at connecting with his audience. And so I asked him, can I follow up? And I said, can I have your email? And he laughed. He doesn't do email. So he gave me his phone number, and I interviewed him at his house in Raleigh to learn more about his life. And each interview was about 2 hours long. And at the end of the second interview, I mentioned that some of my students were interested in visiting the Holocaust Museum in DC. And Abe goes, oh, I've never been. Maybe I'll go with you. Like, are you kidding me? And so he ended up coming, and we went on a trip to the museum, and he went into the cattle car at the museum and narrated. If you Google Abe Piasek, Piasek, cattle car, it's on YouTube with his and his family's permission. I had my iPhone with me. He talks for 5 minutes in a cattle car. He was in 4 of them during the Holocaust. And as I get chills every time I tell this story, just like how much courage it took to do that, and all the smells and everything that came back to him. He wanted that to be part of my students' book of life, and 2 of his great-granddaughters were with us as well in the museum. He created this amazing, amazing moment. And sadly, just as our friendship was growing, Abe fell. He was working in his garage and he fell. And this isn't in the book, but he started to get better, and he started talking to the nurses about he was a survivor, and they said, well, can we hear your story? And he said, sure. And on October 2nd, 2019, if you Google Abe Piasek Hospital, he gave his talk at Wake Med Hospital in a neck brace and a wheelchair, because that was what he did. And he talked for an hour and a half. So sadly, his condition deteriorated, and 3 days before he went into hospice care, and 3 days before he died, he asked me to keep telling his story. I said I would, and he passed away actually on Martin Luther King's birthday, January 15th, 2020. And I started this project called My Friend Abe, and I've told his story now 140 times. And 6 months after his funeral, Abe's daughter Pam was going through all of Abe's things in his house, and she literally set aside 3 boxes of Abe's life. She didn't call them that, but they were 3 boxes for Steve of various reflections people had made about his life, and there were DVDs of talks that I hadn't seen, and it took me a while to pour through it, but it deepened my understanding of Abe's story. And I'm really glad I know so much about Abe's story and for our friendship. And I also wish Abe had taken the time to organize his own Box of Life. I think I've captured the essence of Abe, but I do wish I'd met him a few years earlier and we'd had more time for him to help me build his Box of Life, more than just his life during the Holocaust. Although those 6 years from 38/9 to 45 could fill several boxes of their own. As Steve builds his own Box of Life, his friendship with Abe will make an appearance. Both lives, Steve's and Abe's, were enhanced by their friendship.
So you can now get a taste of the richness of every box. There is more to that. Like Abe and Steve, Charles and me, we all have mentors. And there is a whole chapter about our mentors. And it can be our parents, it can be a friend, someone that we met. I decided to list all my mentors. And among them, it's our beloved Rabbi Seger, Zichrono Lebracha. Actually, when I told him I was writing this book, he kept me accountable, and he said that one day he envisioned me here sharing the book at Bethel. And I started thinking, who are my mentors' mentors? I don't know that. I don't have their boxes. How many times you've heard people asking you, where did you learn that? Why do you know that? And we just learn, but we don't ask. And I really was wondering. So I reached out to Rabbi Seger and I said, I would love to know who were your mentors, how you learned everything you're teaching us today. And it was 2021, and I still have the email when he said, thank you for asking. And he said, include this in your book. And he shared with me who were his mentors. So I will invite Ilan, please, my son, to read what Rabbi Seger shared with me.
Okay. Oh, sorry. I'm actually recording the audiobook version of this, but I haven't gotten to this page yet. So, okay. Rabbi Stephen G. Sager of blessed memory. He was director of Sikha and Rabbi Emeritus of Bethel Synagogue in Durham, North Carolina, where he served as a rabbi for 32 years. Since the day I moved to the United States, he has been my teacher, rabbinic advisor, and mentor on so many occasions. He was also my fellow traveler, as he called it, during my goodbye to my dad, bringing meaning and even beauty to a difficult journey. Whenever I was struggling to work through a difficult situation, I turned to Rabbi Sager. With his wisdom and calming, reassuring voice, he helped me interpret any occasion by asking the right questions and citing beautiful biblical sources, poems, and literature. One of his poems is in my box. His teachings serve as a compass for navigating life, and I will always miss our conversations. Thank you. Thinking about how impactful my own mentors were made me curious about who influenced my teachers and mentors and whether they still reference their teachings. Rabbi Sager's response was a gift. Everything he wrote helped me better understand not only what he valued, but also about his essence formula. My theory that just as a perfume is created by selecting essential fragrances, we choose our own life formula by selecting the values that we want to include. Rabbi Sager shared with me his writings about some of his mentors, along with how he'd represent them in his box. And then this is in quotes from him. Ronald Brownier, The core rabbinic teacher at the Reconstructionist College during my second year made it possible to ask questions unencumbered by the fear that they were silly. His genius was in ability to find the redemptive, meaningful core of every question. From him, I learned to strive to uphold every question. My keepsake would be an index card of the sort upon which I would scribble my questions when they occurred to me at odd hours. Norman Newberg remains a study in patience and slow process. Theater, poetry, and deep connections of texts and souls are his forte. I consult him regularly and learn from him regularly. My keepsake would be the aroma of the coffee that he would slowly make before every class held in his living room. If the keepsake has to be more tangible, I would make it a copy of Bruno Bettelheim's The Uses of Enchantment. Zalman Schachter taught me much about the soul of a text and how to carefully carry it gently and respectfully across the border into another language. He also taught me by example of prayer's beauty and power. Representing Zalman, I would keep a copy of an early translation that I made for him of a teaching by Rabbi Naaman Braslov.
A great voice for the audiobook, right? There are some more of Rabbi Sager mentors in the book that you will find. And I believe that we all learned something new about our rabbi by knowing who his teachers were and the sources of his wisdom. We all have someone who inspired us, who taught us, who led the way for us. And that's a very important part of our box. Think about that. If you could put your life in one box and someone opens that box in 100 years from now, what they will know about you, what lessons, what values, what principles, how you lived your life. I want to invite everyone who would like to join me now by sharing one thing that you would include in your life, in your box of life, in your legacy. It could be, again, a value, it could be a book, a friend, a mentor, a quote, one thing that will be part of your box of life. And I will start. In my box of life, I would include the Kiddush cup that is in my house, that the only thing I know about is that it was in my grandfather's table, coming from Poland, maybe, and it's still there. And it is an object that can't share the stories. And I'm saying that because whatever we include in our box of life needs to be attached to a story. So it's not just junk that one day will be thrown away. Actually, I'm thinking about having a legacy walk through my house with my kids because I want them to learn why everything is there and what it means. Okay. So in summary, to answer my question, I will include my grandfather's great-grandfather, actually, Kiddush cup. Anyone who wants to share one thing that they would include in their box?
I would include, my mom gave me a little like angel statue when I went to college, and I've had it since starting college and through med school. I can project.
Anyone else? One more. Okay. Yes. Want you. It runs in the family. So, and there is something about dogs in the box of life as well. As you see, we can learn so much about each other by asking that question. What one thing that you put in your box of life? Suddenly, I started seeing people in another dimension. Again, the X-ray of their soul. I want to open it for questions. And before that, I want to invite you on May 14th. I will be leading a workshop at Jewish for Good, and it will be all hands on putting our own boxes, very different format. And we will think not only about our individual boxes, but also about our community box. Instead of asking ourselves, who am I? We will ask ourselves also, who are we? Not only will ask ourselves how I want to be remembered, but how we as a community want to be remembered. So I hope to really see you all of you there. And think about this. Living with purpose is our best legacy. So think about that box. And I would love to hear more stories about the objects or the documents that you put in your box. I want to open it for any questions, insights, and if that's okay, if they want to answer questions, you can ask our great storytellers, the readers who are here tonight, that I can't thank enough for sharing your stories with the world, literally. Any questions or comments? Yes. Thank you for sharing that. And I feel the same way. Whenever I hear those stories, there is something that I learn about myself. I was telling my husband that there is a before and an after with every story that was shared. Thank you. Yes. So there are two things about that. I got the same comment from someone who lost everything in the fires in California, and they said, "What do I do now?" But you haven't lost it. You still have the story. You might not have the picture, but you know that you had that picture and you can speak about it and why it is important to you. We don't have the, oh no, we don't have the things that we read about in the Haggadah or any Parsha, but we know about them. They are we still have them, right? So it is the time to write about that, something, and you don't need to be even a writer or anything. You just write, I had this is very important, and this is why. So there are things that we can never lose. we will. That's culture, value, right? And that's why it's so important to share those stories. So it's true. My kids told me, we don't want stuff. But if I attach a story to stuff, they want to keep the story. Anna Frank had no descendants. We are all her descendants somehow, right? The story could have been lost if it was not written, and we treasure it. So we all have a community, we have a friend, we have a neighbor, we have someone who cares about us. And I feel that we owe it to the world to say, here I was, and this is my story. And it's not the object, the concrete things, again. I know people who are creating a virtual box of life because they don't want the stuff. So they take a photograph and then they write something about it, and that's how it's being shared. And I would like to speak to you more about some ideas that I have. And I would love to help you downsize even and think about what's important and what you want to keep in that box and treasure that box. Yeah, well, let thank you for sharing that. And during COVID, for some reason, I've heard of so many people who started looking into their roots, into their families. And I think at a time that we felt vulnerable, we all looked in and we wanted to go back to our roots. And as you said, most things we can find online and create that story, that Haggadah, put that together. Yes. I think we didn't ask. It's not just you. And we sometimes forget that we don't realize that we are vulnerable, that times go on, that we won't have those people forever. And the most important thing is that we learn not to make the same mistake. So if our kids are not asking us, we need to share the story, right? We are one maybe of those 4 kids that we need to ask, we need to share the story, and we need to continue the Haggadah of our times and with our life. I want to thank you all for being an incredible part of my box of life. And I'm happy to continue the conversation. I really hope to see you on May 14th. And thank you for spending Shabbat night with me. Thank you.